We're looking at a worksheet called Sales Results. Although we could create a chart showing this data right here, just those numbers for our 4 regions in the 12 months, sometimes rather than creating a full-fledged chart, we might want to create what's called a sparkline. In other words, how about in this cell right here, a line chart that shows us what's happened across these 12 months. And by the way, in this list, the red numbers are negative. So we've got a mix of positives and negatives. And rather than creating a full chart, we can create what are called sparklines for each of these cells right here for our 4 regions. Sparkline in one sense is kind of a misnomer. It certainly can be a line chart, but sparklines also include column charts and what are called win-loss charts. If we'd like to create sparklines in these 4 cells here, we go to the Insert tab in the ribbon, and here's that group called sparklines. As we point to line, we see the choice. Sparklines are mini charts placed in single cells, each representing a row of data in your selection. And for column, we see pretty much the same description. Win-loss, a little bit different. We will see the data depicted simply as plus or minus in the form of columns, like the little image that you see there. Let's start with line. This is probably the most common use. So we've selected the cells where we want the sparklines to appear. And in the Create Sparklines dialog box, choose the data that you want. It's these cells right here. Click OK. And there they are. Now, you can see one by one what's going on there. It would be helpful if we had some frame of reference in terms of positives and negatives. Recognize that there's a Design tab, a contextual tab that appears when we're working with sparklines. Off to the right, you'll see an option called Axis. Show Axis often is something you'd want to choose, particularly if you've got pluses and minuses mixed, as we see here. So that's a relatively graphic description of what's going on here. Now, I'm going to zoom back a bit, holding down Control and using the mouse wheel. And I wouldn't suggest that you would be using this feature again in column O, but just to contrast the use of sparklines now by way of column. So we've got the cells highlighted here. Back to the Insert tab. This time we'll create column sparklines. And the source data here will be as it was before, these cells right here. Click OK. And we see that option. And for some people, that might be better to depict the highs and lows, the positives and negatives. One little danger of this one, though, is you don't want to be comparing column heights in different cells. For example, in row 3 for the east here, the tallest column there represents the number 296. And that column probably looks about as tall as we see in the bottom row here in row 6, where the second entry from the left, the February entry, is 500. So don't be comparing columns on different rows here. If you do want to do that, you can do it by going to the Axis option here and choosing Same for all sparklines for minimum value options, and coming back again, clicking that same drop arrow, Same for all sparklines for the maximum options. And now the column heights, as we see across these different cells, are proportional. A third option here is to use what's called a win-loss option that simply displays the data as positives or negatives. Now, we can also highlight the data ahead of time. We could have done this for our other 2 examples as well. So after selecting the source data first, we can also create sparklines by going to Insert, and I'll create a win-loss sparkline here. And in this case, I've chosen the source data first, so I have to fill in the other box here for location range. That's going to be in these cells P3 through P6. So whether you choose the data first or the location range first makes no difference. In either case, you'll have to choose the other option as you come into the Create Sparklines dialog box. Click OK, and we can see in column P here, these 4 entries represent pretty clearly the positives and negatives. And we can see in the numbers too, the red numbers are the negatives. Sometimes we're not concerned with the actual values, and that's where this feature works best. As we look at the other 2, consider something else here. We certainly see change here, and radical change as we look at the line chart. Now look what happens here if I make column N wider. That makes the change be not as apparent, not as obvious. As I make it narrower, it happens like this, so it looks like it's even greater. Similarly, if I take rows 3, 4, 5, and 6 and highlight them and make those rows taller, we see what's happening. So you've got some leeway here, and you might call it creative distortion or creative enhancement, you can tell a slightly different story here depending upon the column width of the spark lines or the row height in these 4 examples here. So that might be drawing attention to it unnecessarily by using unusual row heights, but at different times, the idea here is you want to display, by way of a short picture here, a quickly created picture, a spark line of what's going on. It's highly unlikely you would be using 2 or even 3 of these together as we are here, probably only one set of these at a time. Keep in mind too, you've got some variation here when the cells are highlighted. The contextual design tab here, we certainly have some style options here that you could explore, maybe a different color, that sort of thing. Off to the left, you could highlight just the high points. You see the little markers in each case here, the high points, possibly the low points, or without doing those two, maybe just the negative points. We see that happening that way, or possibly markers for all points like that. So at different times, you want to reconsider some of those options. And of course, you've got changes here possibly for marker color, also under sparkline color, or even the thickness of the line here under the term weight. Maybe thicker lines would make that look better. So you certainly have some options here and some other features under axis as well too. These, of course, are in sync with the data as you would expect. So it serves as an alternate for creating a full-fledged chart. Simply give me the big picture. Now, if I click on the upper left-hand corner and readjust the row height to be standard, simply double-clicking one of these boundaries here, we're back to this set. So it's up to you to choose the image that works best for you. Again, reconsider on these column charts whether you want to resize them. You might have to make those adjustments here for same for all sparklines. If you don't, and they're automatic, you have some confusion there about the relative height. But nevertheless, on a one-by-one basis, you can see how these are working and depicting the data to the left in different ways using this feature called sparklines.